Okay, so today we're diving into something super interesting. It's all about the power of positive reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
We see this talked about a lot with kids with autism.
Yeah.
And we've got this research paper here that really digs into how it works, especially in ABA therapy,
Okay.
applied behavior analysis.
Right.
And they use a really fascinating example to kind of illustrate it all hand flapping.
Interesting.
Now, before we even jump into the nitty-gritty of it all, I think it's important to understand that hand flapping, like a lot of the behaviors we might see in kids with ASD, it's not just random, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the research actually addresses that.
Okay.
It points out that hand flapping is, a lot of times, it's a response to sensory overload or when a kid's feeling a really big emotion. So if you think about it, for some people, it might be tapping their foot when they're feeling anxious or twirling their hair if they're trying to focus. Hand flapping can serve kind of that same function, for kids on the spectrum.
So it's like a way of self-regulating almost.
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
Finding a bit of sensory input that kind of helps them manage those feelings.
Yeah, and the paper called it stimming, right? You familiar with that term?
Yeah, skimming. Yeah, exactly.
Which is basically just a way for someone to regulate their sensory input, their emotional state.
Right.
And it's not a bad thing at all. In fact, most of us engage in some form of stimming. We might not even realize it.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Oh.
So it's not that we want to stop these behaviors entirely. It's more like, how do we help kids find other ways to get those needs met? Especially in situations where hand flapping, it just might not be the best strategy.
Right, yeah.
Like, if you're in a classroom or something.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's where I think positive reinforcement comes in.
Right, exactly. Think of it this way. Positive reinforcement is all about increasing the desired behaviors, so the ones we want to see more of, by rewarding those behaviors.
Okay.
So we're trying to build up positive associations,
Right.
not punishing or suppressing those natural instincts.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
So let's say we've got a child who, they tend to flap their hands when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
How would we use positive reinforcement in that situation to help them find a different way to kind of cope with that feeling?
Yeah, so they used a really good example in the paper.
Go
They
ahead.
were talking about a stress ball.
Oh, okay. Right.
Have you heard of that before?
Yeah. They use that example. Keep going.
Okay, so introducing the stress ball, as a replacement behavior. So each time that child chooses to squeeze that stress ball, instead of flapping their hands, they get something positive, right?
Right.
So it could be a sticker, it could be a few minutes with a favorite toy,
Right.
or even just some really enthusiastic praise from a parent or a teacher.
Exactly.
So over time, you're building that association for them,
Right.
Where squeezing the stress ball equals something positive and good.
And it becomes more appealing
Exactly.
than the hand flapping.
They're not being forced to stop flapping their hands, right? But they're learning a new tool that might work better in certain situations.
Right. Exactly. And finding that right motivation is so crucial. Because I know the study emphasized this. It's not like a one-size-fits-all, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
What motivates one child might not do a thing for another.
Absolutely. And that is a very important point that I'm so glad that you brought up, because what works for one child might be completely ineffective for another child. And that's why ABA therapists, they spend a lot of time figuring out what is that thing for this particular individual, what is going to motivate them. Is it something tangible, like you said, a small toy, sticker?
Yeah.
Or is it something that's a little bit more social, like praise or a high five?
Like all about tailoring the approach to the individual child, which actually makes me think about some of the criticisms that ABA has gotten in the past.
Okay, yeah.
People saying it's too rigid or that it's too focused on making kids act normal.
Right.
But this whole idea of finding the right motivation for each child, it seems to challenge that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it really does, because it's about understanding that child and respecting what makes them tick.
Right.
It's not trying to, like I said, put them in a box of normal. It's really about giving them the tools to manage their own sensory input,
Right.
their emotions.
And that's what's so powerful about this approach. It's not just about changing behavior for behavior's sake. It's about empowering these kids.
Yeah.
And the research pointed out this can have some amazing ripple effects.
Absolutely. I mean,
Right.
because it's not just about reducing those unwanted behaviors.
Right.
It's also what's happening as a result. So, children start to feel more confident,
Right.
more in control of their actions and their world. And you think about a child who's constantly being told no, or corrected for flapping their hands.
Right.
That can be so discouraging.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're constantly being told that something's wrong with them. So when they start to understand that they have other options, they start to feel successful using those options, it changes everything.
It really does. And, the study highlighted, it's interesting, this increased sense of autonomy can even strengthen relationships.
Oh, interesting.
Because now, instead of constantly being, corrected or redirected,
Right.
the child is experiencing all these positive interactions.
Right, because they're being heard in a way.
Exactly. Exactly. And it builds trust
Right.
and cooperation.
Yeah. It's like, imagine you're constantly being told you're doing something wrong. How does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't feel good.
Not good at all.
But when you get that positive reinforcement, even if you mess up, but you try it again, and you get that positive reinforcement, it feels good.
Exactly.
It makes you want to keep trying. It makes you want to keep learning. And it strengthens that bond between you and the person giving you that reinforcement.
Exactly. That's such a good point. And that positive association is so powerful for kids. And what's really neat is that these strategies aren't just for therapists.
Right.
The research actually talks about how parents and teachers can use them too.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's like you're giving that whole support system around the child the same tools.
Exactly.
And speaking of teachers, they gave a great example to researchers about a classroom transition.
Okay.
You know how chaotic those can be sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, kids are lining up. The bell's about to ring. Yeah.
Sensory overload.
Yeah, totally.
So imagine a child who, they tend to flap their hands when things get a little hectic.
Okay.
And the teacher, now armed with this knowledge of positive reinforcement, sees the child kind of reaching that point
Right.
and praises them for choosing their stress ball instead.
Yes. Yeah.
It reinforces that positive connection, but in a real world setting.
Exactly. And that consistency is key.
Right.
Because it's not just about the immediate reward. It's about creating those long-term positive associations. And so over time, those external rewards, they can actually start to fade away because the child starts to internalize the behavior.
Oh, wow.
It becomes its own reward.
Right, because it just feels better to handle the situation that way.
Right, exactly.
So it becomes a part of who they are.
Exactly.
It's like a positive coping mechanism they can rely on. That's amazing.
It really is. And, we've been talking a lot about positive reinforcement, but the study did mention that it's not the only tool
Right.
that ABA therapists use.
Right. It's like they have this whole toolkit, and this is a key part of it.
Right, exactly.
But there are other techniques.
Yeah.
And the researchers, I think they mentioned FCT
Yes.
and DRO.
Yes, functional communication training, or FCT, and differential reinforcement of other behaviors, or DRO.
Right. So these are other strategies that can be used to support children with autism.
Exactly.
And these often work together.
Absolutely. They work hand in hand. Yeah. So, for example, with FCT, you're helping that child find alternative ways to communicate their needs.
Okay, so instead of flapping their hands when they're frustrated,
Yeah.
they might learn to point to a picture card that says break.
Exactly. Or use a sign language gesture, something like that.
So it's all connected.
Yes.
And that's what's so, I think, central to ABA. It's like you're taking this holistic view of the child,
Yes.
recognizing that behavior is communication.
Right.
And it's about figuring out what's behind that behavior and then teaching new skills to help that child thrive.
Exactly. And I think the study does a really good job at highlighting that positive reinforcement. When it's done right, it's really about building that child up.
Right.
Giving them a sense of agency, accomplishment.
It's not about limitations. It's about possibilities.
Oh, I love that. And it makes me think, how often do we, even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
really focus on what's not working instead of celebrating those wins, no matter how big or how small?
That is a really good question. It's so easy to get, especially when you're stressed or overwhelmed, to get caught up in the negatives.
Right.
What if we made a conscious effort to shift that focus,
Yeah.
to really notice and reinforce the positive things that people are doing,
Yes.
even in challenging situations?
It's like we were saying earlier about that positive feedback loop. When we feel seen and appreciated for our efforts, it makes us want to keep trying, to keep growing.
And that goes for kids and adults, I think.
Absolutely.
We all thrive on that. Okay, listeners, we're about to wrap up part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay.
but we're leaving you with a lot to chew on.
It really is. It's funny because we talk about these principles a lot, like in the context of autism
Right.
or, child development, but they really do apply to all of us.
It's like that, treat others how you'd want to be treated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's almost like on a deeper level than that. Like we all crave that positive reinforcement, that feeling of being seen,
Absolutely.
appreciated for what we bring to the table.
Think about how good does it feel to get positive feedback at work? Or even just a simple thank you
Oh my God, yes.
from someone who, noticed something that you did, It can totally make your day.
It's so true. And it makes you wonder, how often do we, even with the best of intentions, miss those opportunities
Right.
to actually reinforce the positive? It's like we're so quick to point out what's wrong,
Right.
what needs to be fixed.
Yeah,
But do we ever really stop and celebrate the wins,
it's true.
even the small ones?
It's easy to get caught up in the, the busyness of it all.
Right.
But just imagine, if we all made that conscious effort
Yeah.
to notice, to acknowledge those positive moments
Yeah.
in ourselves and in other people,
It's like we were talking about earlier, success breeds confidence.
Yes.
When we feel good about what we're doing, when we feel seen, when we feel appreciated, it creates this upward spiral.
That's
We're more likely to keep trying, keep learning, keep growing.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not to say that you ignore the problems or that you avoid, addressing things that are difficult.
Right.
But even just approaching those situations with a mindset of positive reinforcement
Yeah.
can make a world of difference.
It's about finding that balance.
Yes.
Addressing what needs to be addressed,
Right.
but doing it in a way that empowers, that uplifts, rather than discourages.
100%.
So it's about focusing on those strengths,
Yes.
celebrating that progress,
Yes.
creating those environments where everyone feels supported and motivated to kind of do their best.
You got it. And, honestly, I think that's something we can all take away from this.
Yeah.
Whether you are a parent, a teacher, a therapist, or just a human being,
Right.
navigating this crazy thing we call life,
Right.
never underestimate the power of focusing on the positive.
It can be transformative for ourselves and for everyone around us. Well said. Okay, listeners, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into positive reinforcement and autism here. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science behind it to some real-world applications.
And even how those apply to, our own lives.
Exactly. So as you go about your day today, think about how can you sprinkle a little more positive reinforcement into your interactions. You might just be surprised by the positive ripple effects it creates.
Absolutely. Because remember, sometimes those smallest gestures make the biggest impact.
So true.
A smile, a word of encouragement, just, a moment of your time.
Yeah.
To show genuine appreciation for somebody.
It matters.
These things matter.
Okay, listeners, that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those positive vibes flowing.